but I mean, we have close to 900 responses, right? So of course we can always have more, and please keep on, like, asking everybody to fill it out. But there is some data, right? So I think we should do a twofold thing. We should have a public meeting, we should record it, and we should also most probably have a written report, right?
I have a question. In other jurisdictions, for example, like Bronxville, the public was involved from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So I'm a little confused on why. Okay, so now we want the public involved. And I had mentioned this previously, that I thought the public should have been involved. Are we now scrambling to get the public involved so that they can make comment, or what's really the holdup? Why weren't they involved from the beginning?
I've always said the public should be involved. I feel like we should be posting somewhere. I don't know where, because I don't have the access to the stuff, but there should be ongoing information about that we exist and what we're working on. It doesn't have to be complete. It doesn't have to be, but here it's like, we're working on the use of force. We're working on a mission statement. We're working on, tell us what you think.
Mm-hmm. Well, y'all do realize that y'all are the public, right? So you are the public. The reason for everyone to vote is to get the framework done, and then when you have the public input, because getting 1,000 people to try to come together and do a couple of things, it'll be chaotic. But we have a very diverse group working together, and being you all are the public. We are all basically advocates for the city of Mount Vernon, and we all come together and get sort of framework, kind of what direction we would like to go in, and then when you finally have the public's the population of everyone putting input into it, then we can go a little further. The public was involved with the questionnaire, the survey. Was having the public involved, and steps that we're taking, but having a whole bunch of people at one time will be very chaotic.
Yeah, I mean, I believe at this point, we can't go backwards. So let's just continue to move forward. If we're going to have some sort of public forum, let's set it up. If it's an update, it's an update. Let's just continue doing what we're doing. And like Commissioner Lacker said, we have to get this. We have to get this done. We have to put it towards the city council, because if there are going to be any questions or any changes or any alterations to what we kind of like have been we decided, then we're going to need that time, and even to clarify some things with the actual police department based on what they are actually doing now. That's the other issue. So.
But maybe we should tune in with the council, right? Just basically in terms of a possible timeline, right? Because I assume the council would want to have because I assume they'd eventually have to vote on that, right? And so there should most probably be a public hearing on that in connection to that in some way, shape, or form. Councilman Thompson, any thought on that?
No, you're right. They are aware of what's going on. I do translate the message to them, make sure that they're abreast of what's going on. So when it's time to vote on whatever's necessary, hopefully they don't pull the game of they weren't aware, as several council members do. So I'm keeping them abreast of the information. So when we have everything not finalized, but just about at the end, it should be okay. But like everything else, we only need 3 votes from the council, which I think we will have the 3 votes we need to move everything forward.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about the council. The council is going to vote how the council votes, right? Mm-hmm. I'm more concerned about having a public hearing in connection with the vote prior to the vote, right? Because I think that is necessary for public involvement.
When I was speaking to Mary the other day, and I was saying whenever we're ready to put forth like a town hall or whatever the case may be, I can set that up in and make sure that we have the space to convey the message we're trying to get across, and make sure the community is involved and is aware of everything that's transpiring.
Mhm.
So DC like it just so that I have it, I started accordingly. So I just wanted to see what the timeline is that we settled on. So we're going to do the public hearing, which
The week of February 15th, because that gives Anika and her subcommittee 2 weeks to process the data from the survey.
But that's only for the survey, right?
That's just for the survey.
Yes.
I was thinking that this commission would look at the numbers strongly on what the survey results are and maybe use those to be the drivers as to some of the recommendations as well. Was that not the thought?
I think we should, any recommendations that we've started, I think we should also address those in that public hearing as well, because as you guys mentioned, we have limited time to interact with the public, so we should use it wisely.
Right.
That's my thought.
Now, is the thought that we would have more than one community forum? And I mean, while we are going to record it, we'll have it aired, we'll promote that, and so it continuously be played. Was there a thought that maybe we do something the second week? Or maybe even have them just every week? I don't know if you want to do that leading up to March, maybe 3 or 4. One in a day, like how I do community conversations, one in the day, one in the evening, to get a different population of people who want to give live feedback.
I think it would be fine, but I want to roll back for a second to the survey. When we look at the survey data, and if we identify areas that we think are in need of improvement, when we present that survey data, we really should have some idea about what our recommendations will be for those areas that we have defined as in need of improvement.
Sure.
So we need to be as, it's one thing, there's 4 of us that have been working really well together, I think, and been rather productive, but I think all of whatever we come with has to be shared with the whole commission first and give people an opportunity to participate in that conversation. And that survey is simply one very small piece of what the whole report needs to be. So, I think we have an assumption already of what we believe needs to be addressed. We are hoping that we are correct in our, or not, it doesn't matter, that this data will support our preconceived ideas, but that's only one little area. So I don't want to put too much emphasis on that. We need to get the report done. And that's what we need to get feedback on. And we need to identify the areas that we're going to be addressing in our report. I know I'm a little.
But the survey does speak to the community input, though, that the conversation that
But
came up.
the community can have input on many other items as well,
Absolutely.
what we asked. And one, for example, is the mental health component, which I'd love to get more community input on that than we had on the survey, and what they perceive as a problem or an issue, or how they would like that addressed better, and see what their suggestions are. People have seen things in other communities that have worked or not worked. It would be nice to hear from them. We haven't heard from the police department. I really would love to hear from some line officers or the union about some of the issues, and we haven't heard from them at all. And I'd be happy to come in, and I know others would do as well, and meet with folks, and even in a coffee shop if they feel more comfortable like that. I will never divulge a confidence or quote anyone, but I'd really just love to hear what the feelings are.
Well, that's a perfect pivot. I'd like to bring in Commissioner Morales, because he can actually speak to some of the disciplinary questions that have come up here, some of the policies that were requested, and he could actually speak to some of the union issues that have come up, because there's been a change in leadership in the union this year, and they have already voiced their concerns that they would like to see, and we know what many of those are. So if Commissioner Morales—
talk to the union too.
Yes, I understand that, but I've asked Commissioner Morales to come here to give us an overview. And then the question is today, as you have questions, being that he's here, ask questions. Let's get more clarity on things that we don't know. And then potentially we can find those issues that we want to kind of drive home, because maybe you're not satisfied with the answer, or you think that maybe PD is doing one angle, there's another angle the commission can dive into. So I figured this would be best, just let him present, and then we ask him questions, and then we can kind of talk about from that, we want to, enhance, specify, whatever we want to do. But I think he's the best source to ask the questions directly, as opposed to just reading a policy and still having questions after we read it. So Commissioner Morales, are you available? I see your
I
video.
am. Thank
Okay,
you. Good
great.
evening, everyone. Thank you for having me and inviting me as part of the. So I'm going to start with internal affairs. Internal affairs, we have a lot of responsibility there, right? The internal affairs unit provides itself on providing the best service possible by ensuring the Mount Vernon Police Department's integrity. Our integrity is maintained through a system of internal discipline, right? Where fairness and justice are assured. Now, during 2020, the year of 2020, the internal affairs, keep in mind, we conduct objective investigations, impartial investigations, and we review. Is someone speaking?
No,
Okay, we just impartial investigations where we investigate our employees, both civilian and uniformed members of the service. But we also team with the Westchester District Attorney's Office to look into these complaints. When it comes to internal affairs specifically, we had 17 complaints that were lodged last year, the year of 2020. 16 were against police officers and 1 was against a civilian. The standing as of right now, the dispositions, 5 of those cases were closed, 3 were exonerated. What does exonerated mean? Exonerated means that there was sufficient evidence to determine that the conduct alleged did in fact occur, but such conduct was found to have been justified, legal, and proper. One other complaint was substantiated. What does substantiated mean? Substantiated means there was sufficient evidence to determine that the alleged misconduct occurred by the subject employee. I can get into that incident if you would like, but 2 other complaints were withdrawn. We currently have 10 complaints that remain open and that we're investigating. So what I want you to be aware of is even though we get complaints in the year of 2020, when I say 10 are investigated, still remain open, I don't want you to get discouraged by that number. I want you to understand when we get complaints, particularly complaints of criminal action, that these are intensive investigations and they take time to gather the evidence, but definitely we have to consult with the Westchester District Attorney's Office. We meet with their public integrity investigators as well. We collaborate to come up with the best form of action to prove or disprove these allegations. We say impartial because everyone's due process. But rest assured that no one in this department wants a corrupt police officer or a civilian. So when we find it, we absolutely take it seriously and we try to rid the department of any personnel that may be involved in corrupt action. As far as administrative discipline, right? Because not every allegation rises to a level of discipline. It may rise to administrative penalties. And I want to say there's for any violations of rules and regulations within the Mount Vernon Police Department, we had 29 incidences last year. Out of those 29 incidences, 11 or 38% resulted in a written reprimand, a warning admonished. That means they were instructed and corrected. However, that was noted in their personnel record. 18 of those actually received discipline, which resulted in a loss of 426 hours of pay, or that equals 50, if you break it down, that's 53.25 days of pay. And if you total it together, that's 11 weeks of pay that they lost. Out of those 29 reprimands, 2 officers are currently appealing the recommended penalties. What does that mean? That means that they've requested a hearing. They get an administrative hearing across the street, and we have an impartial body, not a member of the police department, who overhears the evidence that is presented to them. Remember, in an administrative hearing, the only threshold we have to meet is a preponderance of the evidence, which is 51%. So we just have to tip the scale, either in our favor or their favor, based on the evidence that's presented to the trial judge.
Officer Morales, I have a question when you get a chance.
Go ahead, ask me now.
What are the nature of these allegations that you made, just like in general? Are these like criminal type allegations? Like when we, I just don't, what are the nature of the allegations? What types of allegations are we talking about?
So if you're talking about internal affairs allegations, out of the 17 that we received this year, you're talking about unlawful arrest. You're talking about police corruption that are currently being investigated methodically. We're going through that with our partners. When you talk about administrative charges, those are department rules and regulations that were violated. And that could be a loss of department property, failure to safeguard firearms, things of that nature. So
And these are the type of things that would require some type of expertise in police work.
well, yes, I would say police work, but you could definitely, this forum would actually help us with that as well, right? Because we want to be as transparent as possible, and we want everyone's input into the right protocol, because I can say that at times the police department supervision could be draconian in administering penalties.
Right, because it's basically policing itself. So they believe that they are following procedures, but the procedures could be inherently misguided based on what somebody who's not in military or policing would believe the right thing to do in that circumstance would be.
Right. So you touched upon the fact that, yes, a lot of our disciplinary process comes from the military, and unless you have a military background, you probably wouldn't understand this. However, they do go training in the police academy, and they are taught of their expectations and their duties and responsibilities. So I would say that while you're trained, until you actually hit the field, what's in the book and what you actually do in the field change dramatically. But there are still rules and regulations that must be followed. And that's what we do. Go ahead.
Understood, which is why I asked for the nature of the allegations. My concern, and I guess this is part of why what brought us all here, is that when we have these type of instances, there are times in which a military mind or a policing mind, you guys are essentially policing yourselves. And what would appear to be the proper thing to do mechanically, culturally speaking, socially speaking, it opens up the door for differences in judgment. So not all judgments would be the same. And what I would consider to be, in short, when police have discretion in cases of discretion, the discretion of an officer leads down a very slippery slope. So now you're having discretionary issues essentially judged by other people with military/police minds. That's my issue. I don't know the fix on it, by the way. I'm just bringing it up as an issue.
No, well, I could tell you exactly where, just to give you a sample, a poll of where the discipline came from administratively, if we're talking about, right? Like we had this year, for the year 2020, we had 3 officers that were disciplined because they failed to activate their body-worn cameras, right? Now that could be procedural, because when you're going into a heated moment, you forget to activate your camera. You're just taking action. Lack of experience, right?
But does anybody that's not military, not policing, is anybody who doesn't have that type of background asked in any of these cases about what proper judgment would be considered, or we're strictly going by military structure? Because if you're doing a police state, then you're going to set the tone really quickly that we're living under a military operation.
Well, we aren't living under a military operation because we're a paramilitary organization, and we like to mentor and teach our subordinates as we move forward, understanding that we're human and we're going to make mistakes at times, right? So this is why most of the time you get a written reprimand your first time around it, but we take history into consideration as well. If you're a repeat offender and you just don't get it, then we start imposing penalties that come out of your pay, where you start losing time, and that results in monetary damages. Right?
No, I mean, I get the penalty part, and I'm really not focused on the penalty part. I don't want anybody to break any rules. The judgment part of what's right versus what's wrong and what the procedure is is where like the procedure seems to be flawed if you don't have a fresh set of eyes that doesn't have a military mind looking at it. In certain cases, not all cases, but in certain cases.
No, I would agree with you. And, you know, I would be open to any advice that you can offer us, right? Because we definitely need a new fresh pair of eyes and a new perspective on the disciplinary issues. Like I said, I would agree that we can be draconian sometimes with our approach, but there are other times based on the history and the behavior of certain officers and individuals where they have to be held accountable.
Right, but the success or failure of that discipline shouldn't be measured by how many people get in trouble or how many hours, man hours or overtime hours are deducted in terms of pay. The success should be in the movement and the social aspect of the police force and getting back to the police force enjoying what they do and the social emotional part of our beloved police officers. Maybe just part of that needs to be infused some point of non-military review.
So it's good that you speak about that, because one of the union issues that they were worrying about, we have a policy where we can indefinitely suspend you. As a matter of fact, we have several officers that have been indefinitely suspended from the previous administration, as well as ours right now. And that's because of the nature of the allegation. We are talking about reducing that to a maximum of 60 days and to follow a state civil law, which would be 30 days, right? So 30 days, we would issue you your charges and specifications, meaning that you would be granted an administrative hearing by an impartial body, and 60 days if we need more time to have that process conveyed. So 30 days, we would issue you your charges and specs, which means these are the charges that we've had presented against you, and within the next 30 days, we're granting you your right to a hearing. So we
Beautiful. When you said impartial, sorry to interrupt, when you said impartial, impartial judgment or what have you, the people that are impartial, are they impartial because they don't know the officer, they don't know the department, or are they impartial because they're non-military, non-police?
Both, right? They aren't police department personnel.
Okay.
When you go right, so the judge is not a police department personnel. He's an
Awesome.
independent. He's a dependent, impartial person. We then have the city attorney presenting for us, the city, the police department, and the PBA has their own attorney that they pay for. So it's like a real trial case where both sides of the defense and the plaintiff, they come out, they present their cases to the judge. The judge then makes the final determination and decision as to who presented their case best. From there, a decision is rendered. If the party is guilty, it's up to the police commissioner to render the final decision. If they're innocent, well, they're innocent. They beat the charges and we move on.
Commissioner Morales, I'd like to chime in. I have a question for you. Good evening.
Good evening.
When we are focusing on excessive force, I like to focus on that now because I know what you were discussing, and I'm very familiar with the complaints that are made and who individuals go to. Are you stating that the Mount Vernon Police Department assists in that investigation of their own members along with the assistant DA who handles those cases? It sounds a little strange if that's true, because you're policing your own. So I just need some clarification.
So can you repeat the question so that I understand it exactly?
Yes. The way these excessive force complaints made, an individual who's arrested and says, for example, that the police have done something, they state on the record that they're going to make a complaint to a certain department in the district attorney's office. Okay. Yes. Then from there, that individual, they sit down. Is the Mount Vernon Police Department, are you all involved in that investigation? It would seem strange to me if you were.
No, we aren't. So
okay, I just wanted that clarification.
Oh yeah. So I could tell you that, right? Because we just had what happens there, and I'll explain the process to everyone on the call, is that if a call is made to the district attorney's office, we'll have their public integrity unit. What they'll do is they'll call us up and they'll request all the documentation for that incident, and they'll begin there. But they conduct their own independent investigation that we aren't involved in, and then they inform us of the findings. We have no knowledge of that investigation. It's a separate investigation. When I say that we collaborate with them, it's based on the evidence that we have, where there may be a criminal allegation and then we speak to the Public Integrity Unit, because I'm particularly looking for a district attorney who can generate charges if I have probable cause, if I can prove probable cause.
Okay, well, you said who investigates. Who would decide whether the allegation will be founded or unfounded?
That would be the investigator, right? The investigator conduct their investigation, submit it to their supervisors. They'll discuss the evidence that was gathered, and then they'll make a judgment call based on.
And all of these people are police people and military people with military and police background.
No, that is not true.
I'm asking. I don't know.
No, that is not true. I don't know the background of the district attorney investigators specifically. I would assume that some of them have law enforcement background. Some of them
Most
have
of them do, yes.
Right.
That would be problematic to me. I was asking the question. I didn't know for certain, but I really feel uncomfortable with people that decide whether something's founded or unfounded that can proceed to a jury of their peers having a military background or a policing background and only having that end of it.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Axel. Go ahead, Axel.
Thank you, sir. I mean, first of all, there is, to David Patterson's remarks, there is a CCRB in the works, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, right? Because the city council has legislated on that, and there is prior legislation. So eventually that will most probably be part of this entire process. But my question is, so if I look back at this entire police internal investigation problem, or how the way this was conducted, right? So we had quite a prominent whistleblower case in Mount Vernon, the Bovell case, right? And for me as an outsider, all the checks and balances failed, right? This went on forever and ever. It was apparently not internally investigated, or at least it was not mitigated enough to stop it. Looking at it for how long that went on, and also it failed because the DA never did anything about that, right? And the allegations were stark, right? It was police officers returning drugs to drug dealers after stops. I mean, you know all the details, right? So basically, what I'm wondering what your take is on that, because yes, go ahead.
I'm going to interrupt you, but because you just hit on a very serious allegation about the return of drugs to an individual, and I can say that my investigation is still ongoing. However, at this time, one officer has been suspended based on those allegations.
How old? Yeah, no, I understand that, but the investigation started when the Gothamist article came out, right? I mean, all of that stuff is years old. I mean, we're talking about stuff that you're currently investigating, you know, with officers that apparently somebody suggested they behaved that way 2 or 3 years ago, and we're still investigating it right now, and the officers are still on the force. I know some have been assigned to desk duty, but the entire way how this was conducted and when actually internal affairs came into action, it doesn't look very satisfying from the outside. Do you understand that?
No, I absolutely understand that, but I want you to understand that this administration has taken these allegations very seriously, and we were just given these allegations and tapes as of August of 2020. And so when you look at it, you're talking about 4.5 months of investigation. We've already modified an individual and we suspended one, and I'm ready to make other moves as well. I'm going through the process, things that I can't discuss. But please understand that we are thoroughly investigating these complaints. And if there is proof, and that's the problem, right? They're 3 to 8 years old, these allegations. So when you talk about 3 8-year-old allegations, the evidence, preserving evidence and finding evidence seems to be the challenge. When you don't have evidence, in light of no evidence, you start looking for complainants. And I want complainants to cooperate with the case. And when we try to speak to them, so we don't get all the cooperation we look for, right? And sometimes I get it that people don't want to speak to the Mount Vernon Police Department because inherently they can be involved in these allegations, right? So therefore, we kick it to the Public Integrity Unit in Westchester DA's office because we want an independent body. As I stated at the beginning of this call, we do not want to work with corrupt police officers. We want to rid the Mount Vernon Police Department of any corruption.
But would you agree with me that there was some sort of systematic failure going on? Because you shouldn't be internally investigating these allegations right now. Of course, like if you're trying to investigate something that is years and years back, it becomes more difficult as time passes, right? But so my point is, it doesn't instill in me a great deal of trust in the internal investigations and into internal checks and balances of the Mount Vernon Police Department. But you have to see it like every administration comes in and says like, we're the bee's knees, we're doing it differently right now, right? But I hear that with every single administration that comes in, and then I see that allegations that are 6 years old or however old they are never were investigated, and you guys are trying to investigate it right now, which will be an uphill battle, right? Because it's so old. So this should have never gone down that way. For me, that speaks to a problem.
So I agree with you wholeheartedly, 100%. That was the failure of the previous administration. This administration is currently investigating old allegations, but to say that it was a process with a procedure, it wasn't. It was a failure of the administration to act on the allegations that were made. We are currently investigating all allegations. How do I know this? Because this administration has been in place in a year, and we do not have any major police corruption allegations. We are supervising our people correctly. Any allegations that come in, we take seriously, and we hold our people accountable.
So the allegations were previously made and then they weren't followed up.
The allegations were previously made and they were not addressed.
Copy. Okay.
So I have a couple of thoughts here, and perhaps you can help me with this. What is your correct title, or how should we address you? Ernest Morales, what should I call you?
You could call me, my title is Deputy Commissioner Morales.
Is that how you would like to be addressed?
You can call me Ernest, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Okay, Ernest. I'm Mary.
Mary, thank you.
No problem. In this committee, we've been tasked to have a civilian look at these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Given that there is mistrust, you would give us that there is mistrust, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say there's a perception of mistrust and a perception of reality.
Given that there is mistrust from everybody on all sides, whether it's valid or not, and I have to say that I don't think that anybody's saying, when they're saying, that we should have civilian look at policing practices, that is being done because there is a perception that all cops are bad. I don't think any of us think that. My question, though, is, given that you have this mechanism for investigation, and given that one could argue that the DA's office very well go hand in hand with the police department because they do work together, what do you see as the role of civilian body in this process?
So I would see it as a jury of your peers. When you go to a judge trial and a decision is going to be rendered, it's going to be rendered by a jury of your peers. So when you talk about the Civilian Complaint Review Board, they would independently review the evidence and they will come to a decision, right? And we need that.
That's what we're leaning towards, but that's one of the reasons that I really wanted to have a dialogue with various police officers, because it is important that your input come into this process. This is not about crucifying the police. This is about integrating the police and the civilian component of our community in a better manner and achieving better functioning for everyone, right? I mean, and we also are looking at recruitment and retention. And part of that for me as a long-term civil servant in a semi-militaristic setting, because I'm an RN and we can be very militaristic about order and process as well. And I've done investigations for a long time. We definitely need to get that meshing of viewpoints, because that makes us all stronger, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. I definitely agree with you. And with your,
that's why I hear from differing people,
right.
That you don't have validity, of course you do, but I know that I've been labor and I've been management, and my viewpoint was different at those two places. And I think, we need to hear from a lot of folks.
I agree. I just wanted, I thought I was gonna go over numbers as well. I wanted to present numbers if you were in like civilian complaints. Civilian complaints, there were 25 that were lodged for the year of 2020.
Right.
20% of those, or five, the raw number of five, were substantiated, meaning that we found the officers guilty
Right.
of the practice, right? 8 of those were unsubstantiated, meaning that we couldn't prove or disprove that the alleged allegation took place.
Right.
4 of them were unfounded, right? And what that means is there is sufficient evidence to prove the alleged conduct did not occur, and that was 16%.
And the-
24. Go ahead.
And these are complaints, civilian complaints about police officer conduct that are reviewed by people that are not necessarily police officers.
No, these are reviewed by supervisors within the police department.
And that's problematic because not many people, myself included, by the way, who goes through this process, we won't trust the process because the process does not work. That's why you only have 25 for the whole entire year. Forget the end result, if the process was any semblance of fair, then more people would utilize the process. And so the numbers, I understand that the data is very important, but that data doesn't really mean much. It's more a reflection of the distrust that people have for even going through the process. Because when I filed my complaint, it was reviewed by just police officers and then it was just tossed out.
Did you file a complaint, or did you say you didn't want to make an official complaint? You just wanted to notify the police department?
No, I definitely made a complaint. I don't know, to tell you the truth, again, just going through the process myself is very frustrating and it's very confusing.
Okay.
If I may, before I
Yes,
log on,
please.
I know that it's a new process now. Some of the same things, but we're trying a couple of different things going forward. And as we form the CCRB working along with the police reform, we'll have a better system, so to speak, to make sure that when people do file complaints, that they are responded to, they're kept abreast of what's going on with their complaint, and moving forward, we'll get better results. So we just gotta still trust the process, but we also have to, give it a little bit of time. A lot of these problems.
When did those measures take place? When did those measures start?
I'm sorry?
When did these new measures start?
They're being put in place now. So a lot of things are being changed. Okay.
Gotcha. I'm talking about November, like October. So that's why I'm like, yeah, it's definitely still.
Yeah, and it's gonna take a while. You remember, a lot of things we're still understaffed. So when we get all of our boards together, we'll have more people on board to make sure that everything is addressed. It's gonna take a process, but once we get everything on the grips, it should work perfectly fine.
Understood. I just think it's a little disingenuous to put out the number of 25 people complained about the police in Mount Vernon for an entire year and not say, well, the reason why that is may be likely to be attributed to other factors.
They have to give you the numbers. If you want to know what's going on, they have to give you the numbers of complaints that are civilian complaints, right? And then other issues that most of the calls that come in are not complaints. So
but you're not. It's 25 in a year. If you have 25 complaints in a year, that data is speaking something that was not it could be interpreted one of two ways. It could be interpreted as, you guys are doing such a fantastic job that only 25 people complained. Or it could be, wow, your process is so jacked up that only 25 people found it worth their time to even start the process. And I'm saying it's the latter rather than formal. And that's important.
Well, during the year of 2020, during the pandemic, there's a lot of things that didn't occur that happened in the previous years. So
what would be the average amount of that's good data to understand. So yes, last year was a freak occurrence because of COVID. What is your average amount of complaints per year for the police department? Being that last year had 25. What's an ordinary number? Do we have that?
So to be fair, I did not break that down. I don't have that number for you. I can look at it. I can
Sent
look
me
at
3 years worth of complaints and they look to be about the same.
About the same.
And I think that excellent point.
No, here's what I would say. I would say that we definitely need an impartial body here, right? Because for me to say that A is 25%, there are definitely interactions that I can't say everybody is 100% satisfied with it. And for whatever reason, they choose not to make a complaint, whether they don't trust in the process or whether some people just say, hey, you know what, bygones be bygones, I'm going to walk away and not
Well,
file.
that's important information to have. That's the heart of police reform, no?
That is, but that's a personal choice as well.
That's
right?
not personal choice. That goes to that's the meat and potatoes of why we're here.
But there are
No,
ways to make it easier for the public to make a complaint and to give input, and there are ways to make people feel like their complaints won't be heard for a while to make a complaint. And we, in my experience, in the almost 23 years, I guess it is now that I've been living here, it's been my experience that my neighbors feel that calling the police or utilizing the police is not a good resource for them.
right. So
and,
I want,
I told Derek already that, I just had an incident this past week with my tenants and myself and the police department. And it's that kind of thing that just, and I don't want to belabor it because it was so minor, but they were shooting this power thing here on my street, which is a grand inconvenience, let me tell you. And I had gone to the grocery store and come home and they let me in, and I parked and unloaded and realized I didn't buy the Powerball. I was like, oh my goodness. So I left and went out around the block and bought the lottery ticket and came back and started to turn in my street, and the police had it blocked off, and I just stopped. I had my blinker on and he pulled forward and let me in, and down I went. Not 20 minutes later, my tenant's daughter attempted to come home with her son, a small child, and she went to turn in and they wouldn't let her come in. And so she's driving around with this 5-year-old child trying to get home and can't come in. And the police officer told her she wasn't allowed because they were filming. And she said, yeah, but I live right here. I live halfway down the block. I don't have to go where they're filming. I'm just trying to go home. Nope, nobody's coming in. And so they called me and I called the police department and I said, listen, my tenant is trying to come home. She doesn't have to go by the filming. She just half a block. Can you please call the officer and ask them to let her in? She can show you ID with her address, whatever you'd like, And they said to me, oh, we're not on the same frequency as the officers.
Oh, jeez.
I said, really? And then they told me that they didn't know who the officer was that was stationed at the end of the street, which I found interesting because I would hope that the police department would know who they had stationed where. And then they said to me, well, what's the officer's name? I said, I don't know. This is South Columbus Avenue, I said, she's a young woman. She did not get out of the car and walk up to the car. I mean, and she's
because they're generally unapproachable at that.
Well, who would do that? And then and now it's like 9 o'clock at night. And the police, she said, well, how can I take a complaint that he won't do anything if you don't know who it is? And she's like, well, she has to go get his name. Now, who's going to walk up, given the spate of everything that we've had in our nation, but walk up to a police officer in a car at night as a young lady? I wouldn't. And she said to me, well, you need to go walk down there and see who it is then.
Investigator Kingsley.
And it's cold and I'm not walking down there at 9 o'clock at night and asking the police officer for his name and badge number. Oh my God. And she's like, well, then you should file a complaint. And they didn't file a complaint. You know why? Because it's a waste. They think it's a waste of time. It is a small thing, but these are the small things that create the miscommunication between the police department and the public, and that lead the public to believe that nobody cares in the police department. In other communities, had I made that call, they would be like, let me get right on that. Of course she can get in.
DC Morales.
Hold on. Mary, did you get the police officer's name that you spoke to at the desk?
No.
Right.
No.
That's the problem right there. You see that?
That's not the problem. The service is the problem.
No. Let's break this down. Let's break this down into pieces because
well, you have my phone number, and I can look back and tell you what time of day I called, and you can.
Because I would agree with you. The service is the problem, and it frustrates me because I want to get to the bottom of it. That should have been handled much better. But let's start with the movie sets, right?
So let me just tell you that she ended up driving the wrong way down 2 streets to get home. And I don't think that's a better alternative, you know?
Okay, but I want to inform you that we enter into an agreement with the production company. The production company just hires the officer on overtime as security, right? For a uniform presence. We have no power over the production company because they pay a fee to the city so that they can film, which generates money for the city.
The production company has been delightful. I have the guy's phone number that's in charge. He has checked in. I have a son that's handicapped. Nurses come in and take care of him and leave. He has checked in to make sure that they have parking, that they can get in. They have been delightful. I want you to notice the color of my skin.
Hey,
My tenant does not have the same experience.
I don't have the same experience either.
The
No.
other Black people on my street do not have the same experience, and it is completely undeniable, sir. I
By
mean,
the-
day
Mary-
after day after day.
Mary, I had the same experience, and I had a nasty officer come out the side of his face. And when it was reviewed by the captains and such, they found nothing wrong with it because that's the police mentality. And they're generally
DC Morales, I want to jump in here because the truth of the matter is, at least I was talking to some of our subcommittee members, and for me right now, it's about getting the tire to hit the road right now. And
Yes.
so I got to ask this question. It's already going to be legislated. We're going to have a CCRB. How it's going to be formed, we don't know. But I've learned over the years, and being from the union side, that sometimes you got to be willing to hear the other side and what concerns they have. So from your standpoint and from your police officers that speak to you about things along that line, what are your concerns about having a CCRB? And if there's something that you could say that we should keep an eye on while we're forming this, what would you want us to do?
So I have no concerns when it comes to CCRB. I'm glad that was legislated. I feel that is necessary. We need impartial eyes and ears investigating the police department. Listen, we're a public service agency, right? We serve the people of our communities. We are members of our communities. So I would say it's definitely necessary. However, I will also say that on your committee that you have a law enforcement mentality, so personnel, so they could explain the rules and regulations. That's all I would ask for, right? So if it was 3 members, one of them be a law enforcement professional.
Well, what I've written so far definitely has law enforcement on it and definitely has community members on it. I haven't decided numbers yet. We're in discussion on that. I'm actually doing the writing. But I'm doing it in concert. Axel, myself, Dwayne, and Anika have been, well, Anika, I know you're trying to bow out this one though, but we've been meeting and discussing regularly, and Andam too. Is he on here? I guess not. We've been talking a lot about and reading. I've been reading a lot from other municipalities about how they've done it. We're trying to make something that has credibility for both the community and for the police department, because if it comes down only on one side or the other, it will be ineffective. And that is not the point. It's also, to me, something that needs to come into a sphere of civilian police engagement, whether that be a civilian police commission, kind of what I'm leading to right now. I've seen other names for it. What do you think about that?
I wholeheartedly agree with a civilian oversight, and that would be your civilian complaint review board, right? Where a complaint is made and we have members of our community who are looking at the evidence and they're coming to a conclusion based on the investigation that they have conducted.
So these, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I agree with it. I'm happy. I invite it. I welcome it.
So DCRS, let's talk about something that's been historically a problem with the CCRBs and police departments across the country. Subpoena power. Are you okay with the CCRB having full subpoena power for its investigations?
So that's going to be a decision that the police commissioner is going to have to make as far as what powers are granted here in the city of Mount Vernon, right? And that's going to have a conversation with City Hall as well. So I'm not going to give my personal opinion as to that.
I would say that whether or not the police department wants a civilian review,
Huh? No.
I would say that whether or not the police department wants to have a civilian CCRB or whatever you want to call it, have subpoena power is not necessarily relevant to what we're going to recommend. I mean, we're going to recommend what we're going to recommend. And part of that is whether there is some civilian oversight of the police department, not just in the form of a CCRB, but in a
Well, Mary, if I may, one of the biggest issues when you look at some of the complaints that or the suits that have been filed across the country, I think Jennifer Lackey was telling us about one up in Rochester, New York. Subpoena power has been a major issue because whenever they try to get information, they weren't getting.
I understand that. Yeah, I understand that, and I'm not saying that there shouldn't be subpoena power. I'm saying that I don't know that it's the police commissioner's decision whether there's subpoena power or not.
Correct. As I stated, that comes from City Hall. That's above my pay grade.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
Okay. All right.
And we can recommend that the cow went over the moon if we want. I mean, we can recommend whatever we want. It's not necessarily going to fly through all filters, but our recommendations should be on what we perceive to be best practices. And that's why I want to hear from police and the police brass, police line folks about what do they think are best practices. Because as I said, I really do see I'm not the only voice here, but I do see us as a collaboration, not, we're telling them or they're telling us.
So Commissioner Morales, I have a question and I'm not sure. I mean, it appears that you welcome voices when there is, because what Mary just outlined, right? A lot of the police conduct that the community takes offense to is something that is very low level, right? But it is latent, right? So I'm wondering because, it's hard for me sometimes to reconcile, right? You come on here and it's like, I like what you're telling me. Glenn Scott comes in here, says like, according to him, like everything is being fixed, everything is great. How do I reconcile that with the reality of what I'm seeing in the community? For example, what Mary just said doesn't reconcile with that, right? I had in our neighborhood in Oakwood Heights, right? There were like 10 police cars. They were clearly looking for something, right? And I was just on a run by coincidence. I went up to them, and the president of the homeowners association was like, "Hey, I just wanted to introduce myself. If you guys need anything, let us know, right? If we can be of any assistance, right?" You know what the officer's response was? That was the response, right? That's all I could get out of him.
Military.
Where I'm like,
nothing to do
you
with
can't even tell me your name, or you can't even tell me, not that I need to be nosy about the investigation, it wasn't, right? But that is kind of what we're facing, right? I don't know. I mean, you most probably never had to call the police department front desk, right? But they are the grumpiest people I've ever called in my life, right? And they never have any kind of answer to anything. And so I have trouble sometimes reconciling this with what I'm hearing from the brass on this commission here. And I'm just wondering, what could a mechanism be to upgrade that? Because that is not really, I mean, maybe it's training, but it's really something that I'll teach my 6-year-old kid, right? And so I'm having trouble kind of like closing that gap.
So I can tell you what we have done to train our police officers. We have police and community engagement training, which we completed. We have police and community immersion training, PowerPoint presentations that are given to our probationary police officers. You have to remember that we have a young police force. And I say that because they have lack experience. So if they're going into a situation where they have duress and they're focused because they have tunnel vision, they don't have the experience, and they're just focused on that scene, and someone comes behind them and asks them something, no matter how polite you may be, it is a distraction from what they are focusing on.
That wasn't the situation. I wouldn't do that. They were with flashlights out there and they were looking for something that somebody most probably had dropped.
That may be the case. And I
I've done enough police ride-alongs to know when I can approach an officer and when not, right?
And they're generally non-approachable. And that's why I keep on saying, I know you don't want to hear it, they have a very military occupation type of feel to them. And that's what people are reacting to. So I keep on hearing previous administration and previous people did this or that or what have you.
David, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had an interaction with me?
I had an awesome interaction with you.
Right. I have 22 years in the military. I am a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. I am a lieutenant commander. I was prior.
And thank you for your service. Deputy Commissioner, there's sometimes where military works. There's military in your neighborhood. There's sometimes where you have to dial it back some.
Oh, I agree with you.
And they don't dial it back. It feels like a military occupation. And that's why people generally feel a police car on their block is a negative thing. And the captains on your police force disagree with that. The captains on your police force believe that if there's a police officer outside your house, it's a positive thing. When in fact, that is not our experience on it. And the reason why we are here is to, and I don't want to battle with you on it, but our experience with police is drastically different. And it continues to be drastically different. So as the brother was saying, I don't see any type of shift in the needle. This is not what I'm looking at. And in the meantime, people are getting literally abused with no recourse.
So I definitely don't want members of the public to ever feel that they're getting abused. And this is why the Police Reform Committee is absolutely important.
That's right.
Because we need a different perspective, right?
That's right.
And I don't want to defend, and I'm not defending the captain's position.
It feels like you're defending. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure he feels like he needs to defend because he knows that police officers too. So we have to, take a middle ground here in our discussion. And not, I mean, we have definitely got things of complaint that we're aware of. I'm sure that the police department is not always aware of how the rest of us are feeling. But we definitely want to express those feelings more. And I think that's why we're looking at some kind of civilian police commission so that we have a more open avenue for communication and a way for the public to have regular, steady input into process and procedure. And even if you're in the military, you know how to be polite. And when I walk up to a police officer in Mount Vernon, I am usually treated in a polite manner. And I do have to it back again and again and again. There is a racial component to how people are treated in our community. There's just no question about it.
So at some point,
every day,
So at some point, what are we going to do? I mean,
let's keep going. How prevalent it is, that's where the thing gets stuck in the mud. Is that if you don't acknowledge that it is that bad?
But I hear that, Dave. I hear that, but that may always be the case. It may always be where we don't. But I do think at some point, like Mary said earlier, was that we could propose what we want at this point.
Yeah.
So regardless of whether or not that we could come together about how how we feel and how they feel, whatever, we still have the obligation to submit something here, regardless. So what are we going to do?
Yeah, so I would love to be able to hear from DC Morales is some information on like the discipline matrix, some information on when internal investigations are mandatory, potentially something around what you feel like you need the most help with, how we can assist you as a commission. So that'll help us in our recommendations as well, so that we're moving forward, right? So I think we got that, we're unsatisfied with the service of the police department, but I want to utilize DC Morales's time and his knowledge so that we can actually make adequate recommendations as a police reform commission.
Thank you for that. I will tell you that I'm definitely working on the disciplinary matrix right now, right? So I broke it down into 3-phase violations. There are the first violations, right? Which are my disciplinary mechanisms, I'll tell you. Supervisors may address misconduct through one or more of the following mechanisms, as they may be appropriate to the nature of seriousness and of the misconduct, right? The frequency of the misconduct and or employee's disciplinary history. So the mechanisms could be remedial training, counseling, and internal complaint leading to violations, right? And those violations, we have Schedule 1 violations. Out of those Schedule 1 violations, I have 24 violations as examples. However, the supervisors, with the approval of the police commissioner, and I always give you that because there may be something that wasn't covered in the 24 violations that I covered under the Schedule 1 violations, that would result in a 0 to 5 day penalty. That could be 0 days because it could be one admonished. It can lead anywhere to 5 days.
Right.
Right? Schedule 2 violations, which are only 6, right? And that would be like a police shield, loss of police shield, failure to safeguard prisoner, loss of department property, a failure to respond promptly to a call from the community, right? You call dispatch 911 and they take their time. They don't respond in a natural manner, right? Or an appropriate timeline. Bringing alcoholic beverages not in the scope within your duty, and or any other violation deemed by a chief of police with the approval of the consultation with the Commissioner of Public Safety. Those violations, Schedule 2 violations, they go from 5 to 10 days. Now keep in mind, although they're 5 to 10 days, they can go from 0 days to 5. It's up to 10 days for Schedule 2 violations of penalty. Now I'm putting, after consultation, when I presented this to the police commissioner, Commissioner Scott, he wanted phase 3, right? So we're talking about any officer who fails to safeguard their weapon right now. Let's just say, for instance, Ernie Morales, police officer Ernie Morales puts his gun in a car. It's unsafeguarded. Someone breaks in the car and takes my weapon. Well, that's an automatic 30-day suspension, right? That is the maximum. That can go because there could be exigent circumstances there. So that may be 5 days. That may be 10 days. That'll be on the discretion of the chief of police with consultation with the commissioner based on the incident. But it can lead to a 30-day suspension. We also wanted to talk about any arrest. If a police officer was arrested, domestic violence allegations, those would be phase 3 violations that would lead up to a 30-day suspension. So that's the matrix, right? The matrix also takes into account disciplinary history. If you've spoken to Ernie Morales, it goes with time as well, right? Because if I have 5 years, let's just say I'm a 5-year member of the department, but I have numerous violations. Well, at some point, we aren't going to write me up anymore. We're going to start taking time and we'll start moving up the scale, that matrix. So maybe my first penalty was 3 days. The second time it was 7 days. Third time maybe 15 days, depending on the severity of the allegation that was made and the evidence that was proven. So that's how we gradually move up. And that is the matrix that I'm working on. I've already presented it. He wanted me to add more to it.
So some of the police reform commissions that I've seen have said that the civilian body should be reviewing those policy changes, hiring, firing, promotions. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree with it. I don't have a problem with an impartial body looking at the rules and regulations, right? Because you may see something I'm not seeing. You may want something that I didn't add there from the civilian perspective. We do this based on the police manual. So yes, any input would absolutely be helpful.
Thank you.
I have a question, if you don't mind. In terms of, because we've been talking about, because we had Commissioner Scott on here, and you are so kind to spend your time with us. Is there any mechanism for us to also hear from rank and file officers, right? Because the idea is, we don't want to work in a vacuum, right? It doesn't make, because we can recommend whatever we want to in our report. If this is very far away from the lived reality of police officers, there's a good chance it's going to be hard to implement that. So I'm wondering if there is any kind of mechanism, maybe through the unions, and also talk to union representatives, right? To basically also hear, because I know there is grumbling in the police department, right? I've seen at city council meetings, there is discontent within the ranks. And I was wondering if you have any kind of suggestion what the best way would be to also listen to those voices for us.
So I would definitely start with the union, right? You want to meet with union representatives because you have a different pool of police officers, right? Different experiences within the department. And you may get a police officer disgruntled. You may get a police officer who's happy. I would think that you would speak to your body to see if they would give their membership permission to speak with you. It would definitely have a consultation with the commissioner and Deputy Commissioner Lackard as well. Right? Because I think that if we could have a forum and it was agreed upon, you would definitely want to get their input as well. I think we need a fair and balanced review of what would help everyone within the city. As I stated, the police department, public service agency, and we're here to serve you, right? So we want to come to a place where we're never going to be 100% satisfied. And we have to
We may have lost you,
Yep, we lost him.
Mr. Morales.
DC Lackard, while we're waiting for him to come back, is that something you could accommodate or organize?
That I could accommodate which request?
In terms of connecting with the union and rank and file officers through the union so we can talk to them.
How would you like to do that? Is that just, how would you propose doing it?
Well, first we got to talk to the union, right? We got to ask them if they would be okay with that. And then I would basically just, I mean, ideal, it would have to be obviously, in my opinion, online right now via Zoom, right? Because we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And basically have either select commission members or the entire commission basically have an opportunity to speak to rank and file officers and union representatives to basically see what their needs are, right? What their perspective is. That is how I imagine it.
If I could add to this discussion, before you speak, DC Lockard, we have in Mount Vernon, the Citizens Police Academy, right? During that whole 10-week or 12-week course, that gave those participants the opportunity to talk to a lot of the rank and file that you're talking about, as well as some of these union people. And we heard so much about what their needs are, and we saw it with our own eyes based on what we went through with that academy. So I think we can, one, start with speaking to those people and getting feedback from them, because we already heard from the rank and file. So it's basically, they're going to say the same thing. They're not going to change their mind. They're disgruntled. They have low morale. They don't have the resources necessary to do their jobs. They don't have the necessary training. They lose staff because of salary. All of these things that we already know is what they're going to say. So I think with the fact that we are in crunch to get things done, we should go to the people who already have this intel that we're thinking we're going to get from the rank and file, and start working, putting it down on paper. And, you know, if necessary, once we have it down on paper, we can share it with the union. We can share it with the rank and file and see if what we have is accurate to what they have shared in past settings. I think we need to utilize the, you know, the stuff that we have now. You know, I participated.
I agree with you that it would,
no?
it
We're not
would be
going to hear
nice to
anything
talk.
other than what they told us. Say again?
It would be nice to tie into that experience that you guys have or went through the academy, but I also think it is very important that we as a commission, not through hearsay, get firsthand information from rank and file in the union.
But we already got first. What I'm
thing.
saying to you, Axel, is we
But
already
you were
got
not there
first-
from the commission. You were there as a private resident. That's a whole different story. We need
What I'm
the
saying is
commission
that
as a
we
body
have-
needs to hear.
Listen to what I'm saying, Axel. We have the firsthand information because they gave it to us in these classes.
Yeah, and you're
So what
telling
I'm
me it's
saying is-
secondhand. That is not. That doesn't.
It's
work,
not
sorry.
secondhand when basically they
If they give it
communicate.
to
And what I'm
directly.
saying is, if you feel it's secondhand, we can put a document together of what they communicated to us and have something to share with the union, share with the rank and file for them to basically vouch and verify that this is accurate.
If I
Because
can
what
interrupt
you're
real
going to
quick,
hear is the same thing. You're not going to hear anything different.
if I could just interrupt real quick. I actually just spoke with the PBA president 2 days ago. I also spoke with the second vice president just yesterday. The subcommittee I'm in actually spoke to a bunch of officers also. I mean, they're definitely open to speak to and set up whatever anybody wants to set up, because, you know, they do have a lot to say. One of the disturbing things that I found out by a lot of the officers is they're concerned with their lack of training. And to me, you know, when you have officers out there and they're saying we don't feel trained enough, that's not good. You know, most of your patrolmen have probably 3 years and less, okay, and they have the most interaction with the public. And most of them are probably in their what, young 20s, immature, don't even have experience working, probably their first job, and now they're put out there. So, you know, like I said, the subcommittee that I'm on with the recruiting and retention and training, we're addressing that. Like I said, I'm sure the PBA president will be open to getting his executive board together on a Zoom if that's what we wish to do.
That'd be great.
But based on time, right? We're talking about we getting this done by February. Then we're gonna have these forums. We're gonna have this. We need to make sure that we look to start expediting things. And maybe expediting is putting things to paper and having people review, and then we evolve from there versus going to start from scratch, hearing what they have to say, then putting it on paper, then making sure that what they said was accurate. We got to start moving. We got to start moving things ahead.
Right, Mr. Scott, I agree with you on that point. Question for you: when these conversations were happening, did any of them have any solutions, or was it just the gripes and the issues or what have you?
No, they spoke very candidly and offered solutions to what can be done. One of the most crucial things that was said was we need to start at the focal point, basically at the training. I think Coach D, refresh my memory, the training camp, right, or whatever they go to before is where it needs to be started, because that's where they're getting the bad habits from. And then when they come to the actual force, they're implementing those bad habits. So they gave some very crucial solutions to how things could be done better. They were honest.
I think that's important to again bring your 2 points home, that we take that conversation that started in the academy and bring it into our forum, so that we can be quick with the gripe session or what have you. But part of the gripe session is that, well, what solutions do you have? And more importantly, are those solutions feasible? So like, if I could give them all 100 grand, let me first say, I am not a law enforcement type of dude. Like, you couldn't pay me enough to go out there. So I respect everybody in the uniform, my own family members included. So being that I can't just sit there and write a check and pay everybody 100 grand, well, what could we do in order to improve the culture? So I think that would be more of, for me, I should say, let me speak for myself, that would be more of a reason to bring them into at least the subcommittee, if not the general committee, to hear what they have to say, but kind of moving in the direction of, you're the expert, you know what you need. So what is it that you need? What are your solutions? And then go back and look at deputy commissioners and say, is this feasible? Can we do this? How can we make this happen? I was speaking to Commissioner Scott, and I brought up, hey, look, you know, there are people with money. I mean, me, myself, for example, if I run into positive interactions, and I do football myself, and I said, well, how much does it cost to put a guy through the academy or what have you? And I think he said about $5 grand or what have you. So I said, if I saw a real movement by the community in terms of the police, if I saw the police, you know, doing the PBA thing, if I saw them on the street really genuinely making an effort, and I was approached saying, hey, can I get $5 grand to train a new police officer and put him through the academy, like an adopt a cop type of thing? I would adopt a cop. I would throw $5 grand into that. But every time I see him roll down my block, I just, going back to the previous conversation, that's how people feel. So it's like we get into this vicious cycle where we're saying, hey, look, you know, if you treat me with respect and dignity, you don't even know, like, some of the time. And if I'm getting that on the north side, I can only imagine what the brothers on the south side are getting, because they are reckless. But again, if you improve that, I'm one of the ones that'd be the first one to say, hey, I could deduct it from my taxes, as high as taxes in Mount Vernon are. I could do $5 grand. Let's do it. And that would.
I definitely hear you. And I don't want you to think that I'm not in agreement with you. What I'm just trying to say is that we're behind the 8 ball on a lot of the things, because we've been, really laxed in terms of some of the progress that we need to make. And we need to start moving things a little bit faster and getting things done. So that's basically all I'm saying. The idea of meeting with staff, I don't have a problem with that. I just want to make sure that we move things along so that we can have something productive to share with the community or share with whoever the stakeholders are, and then eventually with the state when we give them the document.
Is there something after this? Like, because I know once our job is done, our work is done, or what have you. But how about something in the mandate that says every 6 months or, whatever, 8 months or what have you, there's some type of check-in between the police and the community in terms of the police officers saying an update, hey, this is what we got, this is what we need. I think that absolutely is needed.
Yeah, I think when you look at a lot of the similar things around the country, it's a lot more even intense than that. So once they've had their say, there's like a definitive amount of time. It's not even 6 months. I mean, it's like maybe once a month. I think the one in Fredericksburg is twice a month. It's very serious to make sure that these suggestions are implemented.
Be implemented,
yeah.
Right. I would love to sit there and say, hey, look, I'm on the board that cops go to in order to handle their issues in terms of the city of Mount Vernon and the department or what have you, and say, hey, look, he asked for X, Y, and Z. We're going to make it happen.
But that's where Mary's suggestion about if you heard what she was saying about there's a CCRB and then there's another thing there. That's where that comes in.
I've written a thing on which I shared here, I think last week, but I guess everybody wasn't here, on a civilian police commission with various forms of oversight with regular meetings, of which the CCRB would be a component. It seems to me that it falls naturally under that or within that. I really, a bunch of you saw it. I went to town on who could be on it and what's the term and who gets to appoint and how many there should be. And I think I have it right here.
Yeah, Mary, you're on point as usual. We all got it.
Yeah, we've been talking about this, like, basically in the sense that the downfall of the CCRB as a body is that they would only convene and deal with the police department if there's trouble, right? Which is doesn't bode well for a good working relationship.
So what I
right?
have is, it's the recommendation of the Mount Vernon Police Reform Commission that the city of Mount Vernon, New York, establish a commission that will formalize civilian input into the Mount Vernon Police Department's policies, practices, and personnel decisions.
Ah, nice. Yes, you did say that, Barry. And
right.
So
I think where that comes. I think that's where all of that, what we're talking about with input and attitude, and all comes in under this umbrella,
right.
Properly executed. But again, I'm just so concerned. I mean, I can write anything I want, but I'm so concerned about perception. And that's why, even though I'm the one, I called Danielle last week and said, oh my God, we got to start writing this report, right? I just because I was on the Charter Revision Commission, and I mean, what a job to write the report. It's a huge piece of work. So yeah, I'm 100% on doing that. And that's why we talked about an outline for that and how can we move forward. But under each bullet on the report, we can still work on these pieces. Like we can say a civilian police commission will be established. And if we don't have time to get it all fleshed out, we can still make that statement in the report and continue to work.
So I think that's a great pivot point. Go ahead, Coach D.
DC Morales, are you on?
Yes, I am on.
Okay, I just wanted to let's go back to the discipline matrix. Is that good? Would that, if it's accepted, take over the administrative guide on grievance procedure?
So it's still part of the administrative guide. We're incorporating it into the administrative guide. The exact procedure is 2.061, and the one before that explains charges and specifications.
So 2.065 will still remain the same, or will it be changed?
No, it's going to change because we're adding in these procedures. We're updating the procedure. The last time that procedure was updated was more than 30 years ago.
Right, 93. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Lisa Morales, so can you talk about what do you think the PD can use as far as coming from the commission? I know time is limited, so I want to make sure we get to like talking about the report and the drafting of the report. And I want to, utilize your time. So if you want to head off, you can head off. So if you can give us some thoughts on where you think the commission can be helpful, that'd be awesome.
Listen, the commission, we can use help with retention and recruitment, right? For recruitment, we definitely want to recruit people that represent our communities. I believe that that's very important, and that's a very important aspect. And recruiting, it starts with recruiting, but then retention, right? And retention is, I guess, a lot of frustration when you hear Vinny Stefano speak, and he was a detective sergeant here within this department. He knows the challenges that we face. Training is a big issue, and what do we need? Better training. We definitely need financial support. If we have financial support and we have the equipment necessary, even the physical structure of our building, right? Our building is an antiquated building, and we need our security system to be upgraded. We need
we certainly, I mean, if I have anything to do with it, there is absolutely going to be a recommendation that the amount of training that is given to the police officers each year is drastically increased. So there's no question, as far as I'm concerned, that that's coming down the pipe. But we have some ideas about what that training ought to involve too.
And that's fine. And any sort of training is welcomed, right? Because that's how police officers learn. They need to be trained, but this needs to be repeated as well. What you teach me this year, I enforce, but then I forget. And I need refresher training as well. Well, we've done impartial bias training, de-escalation training here, positional asphyxiation training, duty to intervene, duty to report. We do this, but we still have to remind our new recruits when they come in of these responsibilities. So yes, it's important to repeat these training regimens on a regular basis.
And refresh them, and go ahead, Anika, I'm sorry.
It's okay. DC Morales, I have a question about the training as well, or more so about officer wellness. And your thoughts around officer wellness as a part of, or the strategy for retention. So I believe that there are psych checks once a candidate is made an offer to join the force, and what your thoughts are on continued checks or wellness check-ins, whether that's done with a professional hired by the department or whether that's a self-assessment done virtually, so that the baseline that was initially taken when the officer was hired is followed up on. And in addition to that, also what thoughts you had. I mean, you mentioned, there's a need for financial support and building services and security system, and all these things require money that, from what I understand, the department doesn't have, the city doesn't have. But what your recommendations are for things that maybe that aren't monetary, that can potentially improve department morale, i.e. things that you can suggest that would shift the culture.
So to get to the first part of your question, as far as the psychological evaluation, every candidate must go through a psychological evaluation to judge their assessment and qualification of becoming a police officer. That's an independent body by a medical doctor, right, or a psychologist. And as far as follow-up, what we have done is, and this is the welcoming of Deputy Commissioner Jennifer Lackert. She has connections into the medical field, and she's responsible for officer wellness. And that was an important aspect that was missing from the professional policing, right? Because we're all human beings, and I think that people forget that sometimes, that we're human beings and we interact with people within our neighborhoods. But I'll tell you what someone did sign on for. Although you're signing on to become a police officer, you don't necessarily sign on to viewing bodies, right? People that were shot, families that were wiped out, young little children that were raped, pillaged, and murdered, right? This takes a toll on you. And in order for you to operate as a human being, you have to de-stress. Some people handle that differently, right? Some take to drinking, unfortunately. Some work out. Some go home and beat on their children and beat on their wives. So when you talk about giving a police officer an option to speak to someone else so they can speak about the issues that are plaguing them, that's a very important aspect. The follow-up is necessary to give someone an outlet so that they can talk about their worst nightmares and what they're experiencing and how this changes their ability to not function as a police officer, but more importantly, as a human being. To get to the second part of your question, when you talk about interaction, besides monetary, I think that what we urge our police officers to do is say, hey, good morning, right? But it starts by going good morning as well. I think it's a two-way street. Some police officers, yes, they get defensive, right? Just imagine a young police officer who may not be from this neighborhood and they're on the south end of the city and they go into a group of 7 individuals who may be throwing dice, which is an illegal action, but they're not going to make an arrest. And this is one individual approaching a group of 7 individuals. And they go, hey, they have to take charge of that situation, right? But I'm human. And really, the 7 people could overrun one police officer. So I have to impose my will. I have to be the bigger individual. It can be done nicely, right? In an authoritative manner, polite. But a young police officer may not know that. So they may react wrongly. They may yell, imposing their will to try to intimidate the crowd, right? Not saying that it's right. I'm saying I understand it. Because fear is something that is real. Training is supposed to help you deal with that fear, but that doesn't mean that that's the way it always works out. So I would say that the message we have to put out to our members in the city and within the community is, hey, say good morning to the police officer. Let the police officer reciprocate. That's what we need to understand that we are a team.
So thank you for that, and thank you for explaining that. I just wanted to follow up on 2 things, or maybe 3 things. So what I was referring to as far as, or what I was asking was for your recommendations within the department itself. So that aren't monetary, that you would recommend that could possibly improve conditions, improve retention. So things that maybe, aside from training, you know, one of the things that we discussed in our recruitment and retention group was continued education, right? So giving officers the opportunity or roadmap, so to speak, to see that, you know, this department supports you going back to school or supports you furthering your education in certain ways. So these are things that, you know, the department can foster within its culture that would improve retention. So I wanted to know, again, like what your recommendations were, your thoughts were around offering things to officers or fostering an environment sans monetary issues. And then to the part about officers, you know, wanting to intimidate a crowd, it's interesting that you mentioned that because, and we didn't get to touch on the survey data here, but a lot of what we were speaking on actually is corroborated by the survey. But a lot of people answered an overwhelming amount. I can look at the exact number, but an overwhelming amount of individuals said that, you know, they don't know the police officers who patrol their community. Actually, 69.5%, which is over 500 responses. People are saying that they don't know the people who are in the police that are in their communities. So if these officers are not even there and present enough, visible to even interact with or have these sort of pleasant exchange or have the opportunity to have these exchanges, then, you know, it kind of defeats like what you were saying about like saying good morning to the officer. How can I say good morning to the officer if I don't even see it, you know?
Right. So I think that one of the issues that we're definitely experiencing right now is badge drain, right? We're down to 193 personnel, 160 something officers in the street right now. And remember, that's not anyone given any time, at any one given time. They come in on tours. So with that said, they're assigned to their sector and they go out. And the real challenge is that they're chasing the radio. As 911 calls are dispatched, they're assigned those calls and they're responding. So they're running from one location to the other location, investigating that complaint, filling out the reports, and they're continuing to respond. We're not doing the community interaction as we should be. We do have our community policing unit where our officers assigned there, and they go out and they do our surveys. But we need more interaction. I would definitely agree with you on that. I think if we had more police personnel, that would be helpful. But we definitely need more police interaction with our community members. And I just want to keep in mind that we have done things throughout the year, right? We did a middle school after school program. We did foot races and basketball. We assisted with food distribution at the Dole Center. We donated meals here, vegetables. We had our National Night Out, which was funded by the Chaplains Association. This year for Christmas, we did Christmas toy extravaganza giveaway. We do the Citizens Police Academy, the Youth Police Academy, various community neighborhood association meetings, right? And we do PD reform Zoom meetings. And we also, most importantly, we assist with funeral details, right? So we do engage in the community where we could, but I understand that everybody from the community wants to see their beat cop. They want to see people in the police officers in the street that they can interact with on a daily basis. And we would love to see more of that. If we could, at this present time, we can't because of the lack of personnel.
If I can just interject real quick, Anika, just to kind of piggyback on kind of like what you're talking about. Some years ago when Obama came out with his 21st century policing and we were instituting that, we had a whole program on what we were going to do within the department. And one of the things is that each officer during his patrol tour was supposed to take out at least a half hour during their tour. And that was supposed to be community policing, because the 21st century policing is based on the entire department engaging in community policing. I was part of a community policing unit back in the 90s, just one of the many units that they have created in the Mount Vernon Police Department. Okay, units are great, but it has to be department-wise. Okay, I ran the Coffee with a Cop program, and I actually was able to select the officers that were involved in the Coffee with a Cop program. And I had my regular people that were always were going to engage, but I used to hand select the officers that I knew that do not engage with the community, because I wanted them to expose them to the community so they can learn that it's not us against them. And a lot of officers may have that mentality, or they may not be from here, but they have to engage. They have to learn the community. And 100% of the time, these officers they loved it. The public loved it. The officers loved it. And they found their niche. You know, I had one officer who was very, he was a military guy, very stern, didn't communicate much. But when we did it at the public library, the kids were just drawn to him and he was drawn to the kids. And it was just amazing to see. So we really need to get back to focusing it. It needs to be from the detective division, from patrol officers to supervisors. We need to find a way to get everybody engaged, and it's great. The police department, Mount Vernon Police Department, is doing the most community stuff that any police department, hands down. Okay, they have other departments that follow what Mount Vernon has done, but we still need to get it to where it's everybody, because you're always going to get the same people that are willing to do the community events. We need it to be the entire department.
So
I
I want to say that I'm sitting here adding to your list right now as we're speaking, Danielle. I'm trying to capture some of these great ideas. But I will tell you that I called Tarrytown Police Chief, and he gave me 2.5 hours of his time on how they interact with the community and what they've done to be more community engaged. So I'm going to put a recommendation on here that there be like a police chief summit that where we can share best practices. Why not? Why not gain from each other,
Well, they do have they have annual chief meetings.
Yeah, annual, not necessarily on this topic of community engagement, I mean, there's a lot of things that police chiefs need. Yes, I'm sure. And I don't know that this always rises to the top.
Anika,
Yeah.
did you want to say, you said one more thing you wanted to say something. I want to say something after you were finished.
Yeah, I did, but I was like, there's so many things I want to say. But Vinny hit the nail on the head, and kind of within that vein was what I was looking for. Things that the department can do that maybe are, cost effective, that don't require the department spending more money. Taking 30 minutes out of your shift, instead of chasing the radio. I don't know how feasible or realistic that is. And DC Morales, you can maybe offer some insight, but I think that that's, a sound recommendation that Vinny had mentioned, taking that 30 minutes to do, a walk around.
We used to call it park walk and talks. Every officer had to do a park walk and talk. They park, they go to somewhere, whether it was just to engage with people at the Dole Center, depending on what their sector was. Whether it's just stopping at the coffee shop, whether it's stopping at the bagel shop, whether it's stopping at, at a corner store, whatever it is,
Yeah.
Right.
And the police chief in Tarrytown did say that he thought that the community engagement and having his officers go to these things, like you're speaking of, Vinny, was very beneficial to police morale.
Right. Because also, again, to piggyback off the survey, one of the questions is the Mount Vernon Police Department proactive in community outreach? And while Vinny and DC Morales have been able to speak to some of the wonderful and amazing things that MVPD does, the majority of responses, according to the survey, of 44.4%, neither agree or disagree. So it sounds like people are either unaware of what's happening as far as, Mount Vernon MVPD and community outreach, or it sounds like they're just unaware because they answered that they don't know. They neither agree or disagree. That they can't say that the PD is proactive with community outreach. So there's definitely a disconnect between what is being done and how that's being broadcasted or advertised in the community.
Hey, DC Morales, I know we're almost done here, and I want to take from what Anika put on. I want to talk about the front part of what Anika talks about, which is about when the recruitment, the psych evaluations of the recruiters, or who you're recruiting. One of the things that we found out, that Randy and I found out at the academy, was there was a concern from some of the police officers that part of the reason why we don't get many minority candidates is that the psychologists themselves that are doing the psych evaluations, or whoever is doing it, is not taking into consideration, urban behavior or whatever it may be. How impactful do you think that is? And if it is that impactful, where would we go to in terms of or direct a recommendation toward that? Because that's a big issue here in the city. Do we do that to the state? Do we do that to the county?
If I'm not mistaken, the Mount Vernon Police Department has its own doctor that they utilize for psych evaluation.
Yeah, it was Dave that told us that he thought that part of the issue, and also his partner that said that part of the issue he thought was that the evaluations that are done on these guys are done by people who are not open to cultural differences or how people are approach to them. So that, for instance, just to take an example, maybe someone who is white who's interviewing someone who is black who comes in with a different type of thing.
Well,
that automatically
last I remember that I think it was Dr. Sweet that was doing these, and he was a black doctor. So I don't know where they're getting that information from. If they have statistics of minority candidates failing the psych compared to non-minority, then that's an issue that definitely needs to be investigated from, even if we have to get independent psychologists to review the questions and say there's a bias, because that's some of the things we were talking about in our committee about providing free training for Mount Vernon residents to take the test, because they're not passing the exam, or the scores are very low, and whatever we can do to help prepare them, whether it's with preparing for the test, preparing for the agility, preparing for the psych, preparing for interview, we need to prepare our residents better than we are.
And it starts with the communication that you put out to recruit residents, because right now, most of the people taking the exam are people outside of Mount Vernon. So we need to put together something that attracts people to this job. And that's where the messaging is important, so that they know this is a vital job. And hey, who wouldn't want to work in their community and do better in their community?
We had an Explorers program here that unfortunately was run by Detective Eric Johnson, who since retired. No one has taken it over, and the city never supported it financially. This man was coming out of his pocket all the time. And this was great because it was high school students that would come. I don't remember how many days. He did an awesome job with them. I mean, we have the Youth Civilian Academy, which is great, but the Explorers program is successful in so many other departments. I know by me if the department doesn't.
I know no one is saying this. You know, testing is always an issue in whatever profession you're in. And I know one is not saying, you know, that, okay, Black, a person of color, you can't pass that agility. You don't know how to interview. But at times when people are interviewing you, they will perceive you a certain way. So I do agree that test taking skills are important, because no one can tell me that if not given the opportunity, that you cannot have more people, I'll just put it out there, for example, who are Black that are on the force. Because it's not as if they're not smart enough to become an officer. So we need to work on that. I mean, is there someone out there who can prep these individuals to take this test? Because you can't just tell me.
That's why our subcommittee is actually recommending that they have free preparation for Mount Vernon residents.
Right.
I mean, if we're taking our Mount Vernon residents up into the lowest score before we take non-residents at the highest score, then we need to prepare them to be able to get hired.
So
even make it to that interview.
Yeah. So we're coming up on the 8 o'clock hour. As normal, want to be respectful of everybody's time. I want to thank DC Morales for, Mary, I think you're on mute. I see.
I have a question for DC Morales before he goes. Is there an employee assistance program for the Mount Vernon Police Department?
Yeah.
That was a yes from him, Mary.
He said yes?
Yeah. So want to say thank you again, DC Morales, for coming on the call, giving us some insight. It was definitely helpful. You know, answered a bunch of questions that I think we've had, and it's going to be helpful in formulating the recommendations. What I do want to say, you know, I'll hand it over to DC Lackett in just a second, but like we said, it's time's of the essence. We need to start drafting the report. So I wanted to see if there were any volunteers who felt like they are able to draft, willing to draft some portions of it. So we're going to try to break it up as much as possible. Obviously, the more hands we have, the better, the quicker we can get things done. I've started formulating an outline. Mary mentioned that she's adding some things to it based off of the conversation that we had today. So thank you very much, Mary. I've gotten some recommendations from a few of the subcommittees. So I'll review those and add those as well. And then I'll share the document with folks. So if you have any recommendations or comments, it's going to be a Google document. You can comment, you can add some things at the bottom. Please don't delete. If you want to change something, highlight it and make a comment so that we know what it was that was there prior to. But you know, I have to hop off. I'm happy to leave the room open if folks want to continue to talk. And but I have to hop off. I have an 8 o'clock as well. But DC Lackard, feel free to jump in.
Well, this was a very robust discussion, which was what I was hoping would happen, and at least begin to move. I think, to be honest, if you look at everything that was brought up, you have a pretty lofty set of recommendations that could be used to really, there not be detailed, but also set the stage, as I have been saying the entire time, that doesn't get very specific, but allows for change in between, to still be in fidelity to whatever the recommendations are. So I'm excited of the progress today. I mean, some things maybe didn't get hashed out as much as others, but use any questions that you have to flesh them out and send emails. I mean, I think a lot of the in-between meeting communication is going to be critical. If there's any role that you would like for me to have in terms of setting up meetings, I'm happy to do that. I got cut off, so I wasn't able to complete the train of thought, which was, if you want to set up a meeting, think about, do you want to have a group meeting with just the executive board, or more private conversations with the rank and file to get more intimate feedback on certain things? I'm happy to do that. Just let me know the parameters of which the commission thinks would be best. So I'm available. I'm back in the swing of things. So everyone knows my cell phone number and my email. I would not suggest calling the office because I'm in and out of my office, but the cell phone and text message will definitely get me.
What I will say is all requests, like we said on the last meeting and probably the one before, is let's make sure we're copying all co-chairs of the commission. So that way everyone's in the loop of everything. In case one person can't answer, someone else can probably hop in and assist. But back to whether or not anyone wants to volunteer to start drafting. I know they kind of went on, we got Mary up there. Thank you, Mary. All right, well, think about it. I'll send out an email and see if others want to hop.
I'll help, but let me just find out what this basketball thing is going to be. If they starting up next week, then, you know.
Okay, awesome.
I'm also, I was gonna suggest that, you know, each subcommittee drafts their own report, and then hopefully there's just one final editor who can sort of weave everything together. I don't know if that's a suggestion that the group is open to.
I'm open to it. I think that's a great idea. I don't mean to jump in, but I provided my outline, so if you can work with that, I would love that. If I need to add anything, I'll do it. But I agree with you, Anita.
Awesome.
Also, when the survey closes on the 31st, I have a link that I can share with the group so that everyone can have access to the report, and whatever information you find useful, you can apply it to your reports and fill out whatever blanks or, you know, whatever have you.
That's great.
So what I'll do in the follow-up email when I send out the recording, I'll share the outline that I referenced earlier. I'll also share, Mary shared some reports with me from different communities. So I'll share those with you all so that you can have just, you know, a baseline of what other communities are doing, and that'll help in the drafting process. And yeah, I think that's it. Next week, same time, same place. And
oh, next week I won't be able to make it. Sorry, I have something to do next week.
So next week, just FYI, DC Lacker is going to be presenting some of the things that the department is working on, some of the initiatives that she's working on as well. So just like DC Morales provided us with some insight, DC Lacker will be stepping in next week to do the same with, you know, over the reform initiative that she's in charge of.
Okay. And thank you, DC Morales, for coming on as a guest today.
Thank you, guys.
Really appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thank you again. And look out for my email. I'll try to send it as soon as, you know, the Zoom recording is done.
Thank you for hosting, Danielle.
Everybody.
Yes, thank you, Danielle.
Good
You were a great
night.
host. Okay, good night, bye.
All right, guys.